Have you ever been in the situation where you put all this work up front for a potential client? You figured out exactly what they needed. You came up with a perfect plan. You presented the plan to them. It could really solve their problems, and then they didn't move forward. And you had all this time and energy and effort tied up into this presentation, and it was all for nothing. Well, if you found yourself in that position, stick around, because I'm going to show you how I was able to consistently charge $7,000 for what I called the deep dive discovery. And my clients paid for the work I did up front before I actually pitched them what they ultimately wanted. So if you'd like to see how I did that, stick around. So to begin with, let's actually start with what deep dive discovery is. Okay, so a discovery is simply when you're having a conversation with a client and you're trying to determine what it is they need. Now I learned something called the sales interaction model. Okay, with the sales interaction model, the way it works is the more interactions you have with somebody, the more opportunity they have to know, like, and trust you. Okay, this is why I like the challenge framework so much. Like in the online world, creating a challenge, because it's like a 5-day experience, or it could be more or less, but generally it's a 5-day experience where you're able to walk people through a particular journey, and they're able to see results during those 5 days, and they have all these different touch points with you, and they get to know, like, and trust you. So when you're trying to sell to somebody, there's no substitution for someone knowing, liking, and trusting you. Now, how do you get somebody to know, like, and trust you in order to pitch them a $7,000 deal? Well, obviously it depends on what it is that you're doing, right? If what you actually offer is a $1,000 solution, like, you just spin up a logo or whatever the case is, and you charge $1,000 for it, then you're not going to be able to do a $7,000 discovery call coming up with what they need for this logo if you're only charging them $1,000 for the logo. Okay, so my price ranges went anywhere from $50,000 to $150,000, $200,000, and the way that worked was I'd have a couple introductory calls with the person. Okay, so I would have 2 different calls. One just an introductory, whether usually they contacted me. I would get to know who they were, what they were after. Usually they thought, oh, this is simple. I just need an app that does X, or I just need a website that does Y. Okay, but things are never just that simple. But I was able to ask questions in that first call to help them understand I knew what I was talking about, to help them understand that I was an expert in this field, and I've been thinking about this for years and years and years while they have just started on this journey. And the questions I was asking them made them realize, oh, this guy knows what he's talking about, right? So just that little bit of authority up front by asking the right questions, because when you ask questions, it requires the prospect to actually think about it. They have to stop and have to consider what you said. And by doing that, it actually triggers something where it's like, oh, I didn't think about that. Oh, this guy's smart. Okay? Now, it's not you're just trying to come off of being smart. You are. The whole point of this isn't just, well, what questions can I ask to appear smart? And that's not the goal here. It's just a byproduct of it. So fortunately, it's just kind of a happy accident, if you will. That's how the result of that. But the whole reason why you're asking questions is you're trying to do a couple different things. One is you're trying to say, hey, is this client a good fit for me? Right? The second thing is it's a way actually your client, it can evaluate you as well. So it's actually, helping them out as well, this first part of the interaction. Okay? But you're finding out if this is somebody you actually want to work with or not. Does the idea, does it have validity? Is it something that if you take this project on, are you going to be able to give them the results thereafter? Right? So besides asking kind of the questions about the project, you're not trying to get too far in the weeds on this unless it's something that you think is a real big sticking point or something that could really change the direction of how you go about fulfilling on this thing ultimately, right? Because if it's something that's outside of your wheelhouse, for example, then obviously unless you're trying to grow in that area, it's not something you'd want to take on, right? You'd want to refer them to somebody else or whatever the case was. But maybe it's something where you're just trying to get more information, whether you can go down this path or another path. Asking those questions will help you see exactly where they're at. Don't be afraid to talk about budget earlier rather than later. Okay, they always want to have a ballpark, and obviously the whole point of the discovery call is because, hey, this is complex and we don't know what the price is going to be. So I cannot give you a hard price on what this thing's going to be. It's why we're going through this discovery process. And they want to push back and say, yeah, but this is just a simple thing. I just need this. But you can just give them plenty of examples in the past where a client has come to you and said, hey, I just need this. It's simple. And you get down to it, and it's not so simple. They didn't tell you 20 other things that they actually needed, and they told the effect how something was supposed to be done in the first place, right? Because whenever, and this is a story I always tell, is whenever I've tried to short circuit the process and help a client out, help a prospect out by foregoing the deep dive discovery, it always costs a client more in the long run. Always. Because you don't know what you don't know. And the more time you spend up front to know, the better off you are. And here's the other thing I tell them. It's like, back to that $7,000. Again, you can charge whatever makes sense in your arena. For me, when I was charging $7,000 for these deep dive discoveries, it was to actually figure out exactly what they needed. Because I always wanted to provide pretty much like a flat quote. Like, this is what we're doing, and these are the things that we're not doing, right? We'll have conversations around what we're doing and what we're not doing, because there's all kinds of conversations with companies, especially in custom software development, which was the world I was in for a couple of decades. There's always ideas like, oh, maybe we want to do this in the future, maybe we want to do the other thing. And as time goes on, it can get confusing in the prospect's mind of what was actually included and what's not included. So ultimately, when you provide a statement of work, you do so listing out, hey, these is exactly what's going to be in here, and then these other things are exactly what's not going to be in there. And you can explicitly call out, hey, this is phase 1, this is phase 2. Phase 1 and phase 2 could potentially already be paid for or not, or phase 2 might be paid for or not, or it's just at a later date we will tackle these things and whatever. And for those other projects, you can determine if you're going to do a deep dive discovery, depending on what it is. If we've had enough conversations up front and we just need some clarification, I might not do a full-fledged deep dive discovery. Usually I won't, but it just kind of depends on what it is. If it's a brand new project with an existing customer, I still will. And you'll usually get this question, well, if I go forward with you on this project, will those funds roll over into my project? Will I get a discount? And I always say no. That's not the deep dive discovery. The point of that is so you'll actually have a full-fledged project plan from me to you that you can then turn around and shop out to other development agencies in that example again. So as I was a consultant, it was all around software development, right? Now, I did have a few that actually did that would actually shop it around. And I had, and usually I was more expensive which I already told them out in front. I would say, I'm a Lamborghini dealership, not an Oldsmobile dealership. And so they already knew up front that, I was going to charge potentially more than others. Okay? Because here's the thing. There's no strategic advantage to being the second cheapest. If you can't be the cheapest, there's no advantage of being the second cheapest. Right? And there's plenty of advantages to being the most expensive. Now, here's the other thing. If you're the cheapest, nobody's going to believe you're the best. And if you're the best, nobody's going to expect you to be the cheapest. If a client is coming to you, a prospect is coming to you, it's because you are the expert. They want something done. Now, you need to make sure you're marketing yourself so that you're not a commodity. It's not just, oh, why don't I just go to Fiverr and get this done, or go on Upwork and do this. Like, I need something that I believe only you can give me, right? And this is these first conversations before you even get into the deep dive discovery. So these are the non-paid initial conversations. Again, I usually try to keep them to 2, maybe 3. Don't go beyond that, because now I'm providing all this work for free. Now, technically, I've done that a lot throughout the years, and I don't mind having conversations with people and providing value. I've done that plenty of times without knowing that somebody wasn't going to go to the next step, and that's not a problem. But what you don't want to get in the habit of is spending 40, 80 hours on some proposal that pretty much has zero chances of turning into a deal for you, right? I mean, you spend a full work week or 2 full work weeks working on something that you're not helping existing clients and you're not trying to get other clients. You're just working on this one deal and you're not getting paid for it. Like, you won't stay in business very long if you do that, okay? So in these first calls that are free, it's all about asking questions, getting a feel for things. And then you may ask for something as a follow-up in the second call. And I'll usually do that. Okay, and the next time, let's meet in 2 days and let's hash this out a little bit more. If you will, give me this information and that information, right? Because this way you're able to determine if they're going to follow through, if they're going to respect kind of the way you work and what you ask for. Because if they don't, then it can be a red flag that maybe this is not a person you want to work with. Or it is, but you just got to factor into it that they may be delayed in responding on things and put that into the whole process. And of course, as you go through your deep dive discovery itself, which could last 4, 8 different calls, that you will see kind of the repetition of what happens. Like, are they habitually late getting back to you? Are they habitually late to get on the call in the first place? Or are they pretty prompt? Do they give you things when you ask for them? But again, all these interaction points just help build that relationship on both sides, right? So you're able to kind of see how they work. And of course, since you are the consultant here, you can give them leeway, right? And we'll try to adapt yourself to work in their mode, assuming it doesn't actually hurt the value of what you're providing, right? Be flexible on how they work as long as it doesn't negatively impact what you're actually delivering. When you are in this deep dive discovery process, you will actually have multiple calls. Typically, I'll meet twice a week for 3 or 4 weeks. Okay? So twice a week, 3 or 4 weeks, couple hours at a time. Now, again, you may not need to do that depending on what you're a consultant in. So while you're in these introductory calls and you're trying to pitch your deep dive discovery, how do you go about doing that? What's the conversation? How do you do it? Well, usually comes around when they start asking for how much this thing's going to cost. And you can bring it up before they do if you like, but it's like, well, I can't tell you how much it's going to be. We can talk some more. Maybe I'll give you a ballpark range, but even then it's going to be really flimsy because my process is I do a deep dive discovery. And in this deep dive discovery, I ask you lots of questions and I get intimately familiar with what it is that you're trying to do. And through this process, I'll end up asking questions that you never thought of, and we will hit things off early rather than late. Because when it comes to custom software development, the longer you wait to change something, the more expensive it is. So the sooner you know about this new feature or this particular way that you want something done, the better off it is, the cheaper it is overall. Because the further you get down in the process, the more code you have written and the things, the more changes that you make, the more costly they are. Now, in your world, that may or may not be accurate, but chances are it usually is. And again, you can adjust this for kind of what you deliver and the actual cost and the pain points of changing things later on in the process. But that's the big selling point for actually getting the client to agree to do a deep dive discovery that is paid. Okay? That's the key here. It's paid because you're going to spend multiple hours with this person over a course of a few weeks, and you want to get paid for that time. Now, the other thing this does, as I mentioned before, is it adds in a bunch more touch points. So now the client gets to know you better, gets to see how you work, gets to see that when you say you're going to have something for them the next time you talk, that you do. You're going to go research something and come back with some suggestions that you do, right? It builds up this trust. You can't force trust and you can't expedite trust. Like, trust takes a certain amount of time. You have to spend time with that person. In the virtual world, doing a challenge is a great way to do that. In a B2B type world, you're going to have typically, sales calls or video calls. Now, I do typically do these things doing video calls. So if you're not actually in the physical room with somebody, then having a Zoom meeting, Google Meet, something like that is extremely beneficial because they can see your eyes and see that you're excited about the project. It just builds that trust quicker. They also like the idea that, hey, I'm going to pay for this up front, but I will actually have this project plan when I'm done. This guy, as in us, as in the consultant, they'll be thinking, this guy gets me. He's asked me questions that I didn't even know to ask. So I don't really trust anybody else to go through this process with me. And I've already spent a decent amount of time explaining this stuff. I don't want to waste that time. So all these things are going through your prospect's mind. Okay? So you may think it's a hard sell to, get $7,000 after just a couple things. But it's actually not that hard. Now, once you actually have the deep dive discovery nailed down that this is what you're going to do and you get that check, for me personally, you can determine how you want to get paid for it. For me personally, I ask for half up front and then half when I delivered the project plan. And I also tell them that if it's something that I actually want to work on and help them do this, because it's not a foregone conclusion that I'm just going to go work on this project when we're done with it, right? When we're done with the actual proposal, and the project plan itself doesn't necessarily mean I'm going to work on it. I may or may not, depending on what I have going on and whether I actually want to spend time on this project. So it also plants a seed of kind of scarcity in their mind of, well, I would like you to do it. I was trying to think if I had anybody who paid the deep dive discovery but didn't actually do the project, and I didn't. The only time that occurred is when I pretty much did the deep dive discovery without charging them for it. So I spent all this time up front, and then they just kept what they had. That's usually your biggest competition anyway. Usually it's not some other development agency or something of that nature. It is typically them just doing the status quo, doing what they've always done. That's usually your biggest competition. So it is important that when you go through the deep dive discovery, that you question why they want this. What's the reason? Why do they want to pursue this? Why do they want to create this app? Why do they want to create this site? What do they want to do? Because in your presentation then later, you can actually call that out. Okay? But the whole key here is those first few meetings, you're asking questions, you're figuring out how you're going to work with this person, and you're letting them know in order to work with you, you require a deep dive discovery. It's a paid discovery. You can call it whatever you want to, but it's a paid discovery. Now, typically, I price it around 10% of what my normal projects were, right? So my normal projects around 70,000 or so, getting some less, some more, but just to see if they're serious enough as well, because the last thing you want, if you have like a $70,000 project, it's going to take, multiple months of your life. You want to make sure that the client can actually pay. They actually have the funds to do so, right? Determine what problems people have, what the value of that thing is, and then figure out how to give them an offer that's like 10 times less that amount. So it's a no-brainer for them to spend that on you because they'll spend $1,000 on you, but they're going to get $10,000 in return. Like that's a good deal. And so you figure out what value you can provide and what they'll actually make from this value they provide. Charge 10% of that, and then you charge 10% of that for your actual paid discovery. That way, the work that you're doing isn't for nothing. Now, I hope this is beneficial to you. I was a consultant for a couple of decades, and that's why I want to provide this tip. This one thing here changed my business tremendously, of actually charging for that discovery work up front. I highly recommend you incorporate something like this. Since I was a consultant for many years, I understand what it's like to work like crazy and feeling like you're always behind, feeling like you can't be there for your family. When you're with your family, you're feeling distracted that you're not working. And then when you're working, you're feeling guilty that you're not with your family. That was a rut I found myself in for years. And I finally found a way out of it. And so now I'm on a mission to actually help consultants to not fall into that trap or to get out of that trap if that's where they're at. So if that's you, I highly encourage you to jump into my Work Smarter Challenge. My Work Smarter Challenge will help you actually double your revenue while reducing your workload in half. The whole point of that is so you can actually spend more meaningful time with your families. I hope this was beneficial to you, and I'll see you in the challenge. Chances are you'll like this next video.